I think people just assume they need an app or their website needs updating, and if they just reskin it and make it look nice, that's going to fix the problems with a bit of tinkering maybe here and there based on maybe some analytics, which again is part of the process. But I think if you properly understand user experiences, the result of the interactions at every touch point a customer is going to have with your organization and its products and services, it's not just necessarily about the digital experience or the digital touch points, it's everything.
Hello and welcome to the UX Usability Podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Parker, and today we're going to be talking about being a design consultant. Now, design is hard. If you work in design or you know anyone who works in design, you'll know it's not just having great drawing skills or even having drawing skills. It's not about having that genius idea that you just spew creativity and it's all wonderful. It's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of hard research, and it's a lot of drawing upon your experience from years of finding problems, banging your head against a wall, and then finding your way through by working with people and understanding people. These are really incredible skills that take a long time to learn. So if you are a company, you may have a great in-house team, or maybe you can't quite afford an in-house team right now. You're going to be reaching out to consultants. And these could be individuals like myself who come on board and help you understand your users and help you understand what the problem is that needs to be solved, and then gives you a solution that can work towards creating those great experiences. Or it could be a whole team. Tonight, I'm speaking to two incredible design consultants from Bunnyfoot, which is a design consultancy based in London. They specialize in UX design, understanding people, and creating those amazing experiences. So I really hope that you enjoy sitting down with me and talking to Pete and Cathy about just their experiences, what it takes to really understand people and generate wonderful design ideas.
We are a consultancy, so we help our clients and advise them at different stages through the user-centered design cycle. So we might come in at the very early stages and provide guidance on what to do in the very kind of open areas, investigation, and help to direct the research in that way. We might come in the middle when we have some initial designs just to test those with some users and get some initial feedback, or we might test the live site or even competitor sites as well as part of that process. Our service providing offerings are quite varied, so that enables us to come in at different points in the project. Our preferred as consultants and as Bunnyfoot is to come in as early as we can as possible in that process, because we can iron out problems that later come down the line. We can help save money and we can help structure the project in a way that would benefit both the design, the users, and the purse strings, if you like. Anything else to add, Pete?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that, and that was a great description, Cathy, is that one of the other big things that Bunnyfoot's really tries to champion is what good UX is. Because UX as a discipline has been sort of maturing for a while now. But what that means is that lots of people are kind of joining the party. And so as that causes a problem for our clients in terms of knowing what good UX looks like. So when they buy that service from a consultancy, they know they're getting value for money. And so part of how we do that is through our training provision as well. So we've run a lot of different training courses across all the full range of the design process, as well as sort of internationally certified qualifications, which both Cathy and I teach on, with the idea of raising the bar within the UX community. So people get to know what good UX looks like, and so they can do it better themselves internally, but also if they need some extra support from people like Bunnyfoot, they know what they should be looking for when they're approaching agencies.
When you think about the double diamond design thinking model, where it's starting with defining the problem, is that the point you'd like to come on, where that initial discovery, or is there a little further along in the process for you?
ideally we'd like to be in at the very beginning, and ideally we'd like to be there informing strategy as well. So I think I'm sure any team with any organisation who's got some kind of stake in delivering something would always want to be in as early as possible, so their opinions can be considered and their expertise can be inputted into that process. But certainly, given that we're a research and design focused consultancy, for sure we'd like to be there right at the beginning. However, I think it's also worth saying that at any point in the process where you get to have some kind of UX input, it's going to be better than nothing. But the real kind of value comes from when we can come in as early as possible to help inform things at an early stage. Just because it involves, or it provides so much benefit in terms of reducing knock-on costs and time savings and all the kind of stuff about de-risking a project, which I'm sure people would want to do.
Yeah, because one of our service offerings as well is around actually creating those designs. So we'll help and work with teams to actually create those initial prototypes and provide blueprints and things. So it's not just usability testing that we do, although that is very much our bread and butter. We do also designs and graphic design and things. So we're quite broad in our offerings.
So if you're a company and thinking about bringing a UX design consultancy on board, what's the benefit of going for a UX consultancy versus someone who's a great UI designer?
Take this one. So as an external consultancy, we have lots of knowledge from all of the various different clients that we work with. We work in all different sectors. We have a very broad range of experiences and knowledge that we can use and utilize to help input on the design. So a lot of our clients really benefit from all of our previous experiences and all of our previous projects. Sometimes our clients really appreciate coming to a consultancy because of that third party and actually having that external viewpoint in terms of the internal politics that can come in. So it being said by an external party can help in those conflicts and those difficult conversations. Quite often, the outcome of usability testing isn't always positive. In fact, it's quite often the opposite. And so it's our job to actually help communicate that to different teams, and that might be a cost implication, that might be a strategic implication. And so we can help them to communicate that and actually work with their different teams to get around the conflict and the problems that usually come out with that as well.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add to that is that, a UI designer, in terms of how I understand it, is an essential part of the puzzle, a piece of the puzzle, because you need someone who knows how to design, great UIs. But UX is much more than just UI design, and so I think if a company was looking to bring in a UI design thinking that's going to solve all their UX problems, then they're missing the trick, because it will solve part of their problems. But let's say, for example, if that UI is just invented out of thin air without any kind of research to provide like an evidence base as to why the UI would look, then effectively you're taking a punt, and it might look nice, but it might be totally ineffective. So, I think that's the key sort of message I'd get across for that.
And I think also if they're just looking at, employing a single UI designer, let's say it's quite a small company, then again, that UI designer shouldn't be testing his own baby because, nobody's baby is ugly. And so again, if they were having a team of UI designers, then they could potentially test or moderate each other's designs. But if it's just a single UI designer, then there is an influence that person will have on the designs because they're emotionally invested in them. So that can be quite dangerous.
So we've had this phrase thrown around quite a lot in books and podcasts. What is an ugly baby?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I guess the way I frame it in my mind is basically something that isn't fit for purpose. So it's not going to meet the user's needs. It's not going to necessarily meet the business needs either. It's basically something that's been kind of cobbled together probably it's probably a job that's been handed to a design team, so just get on and do this, and they've kind of maybe produced it without being sort of going through the full kind of due diligence of a good design process.
I think I describe it as potentially it's a HIPPO, so the highest paid person's opinion. It's something that they've said, yep, this is what I think, this is what my mum said, or this is whatever I've experienced, so I believe in this completely. There you go and design it, no questions asked. They just go ahead and design that. So they've had no input from users, which is very dangerous.
Yeah, I think as well, it's the sort of thing that you can spot as someone that knows what they're looking for as well, because you might put, say, a badly designed app or badly designed website in front of somebody, a customer, for example, and they might struggle to complete their tasks and find it, an absolute headache, but they wouldn't necessarily know the things that contributed to those pain points. So I think, certainly when you put your expert sort of perspective on stuff, you can see things immediately, like, particular, so even just like visual design issues that might be off, or confusing information architecture or anything. So it's kind of, what might look like to a layperson as, a perfectly usable or nice looking website, to a professional might be thinking, yeah, we need to take a real sort of deep look at this thing again. So I think possibly, what is an ugly baby to a designer is possibly not what an ugly baby is to a customer. So maybe there is a distinction in that as well.
Okay. So I pick up on what you said about input from users going through a proper design process. What kind of design process would you love to go through, and how would you incorporate users in that process?
Do you want to go first, Cathy?
Yeah, can do. So ideally, we'd like to start at the very beginning. We'd like to be involved, as we've already mentioned, kind of at the very strategic area, so we can help scope a complete timeline from very blue sky investigation kind of work. So we might do ethnographic research, we might do focus groups, we might do diary studies, so very much exploratory research methods, and then going into design, so kind of following the whole UCD cycle and involving users as much as we can, as much as budgets allow. Whenever there's a question that's raised, or whether we're not sure about a specific design, or there's conflict, or there's politics with business needs or user needs and things like that, then we'll get users in to get that evidence. Again, that could be a range of different activities in how we do that. So that could be usability testing, that could be ethnographic, it could be all sorts of different reasons as to why we might choose different methods at different points in the process. But we're continually going back to users as a sounding board to understand what direction we need to go into next. So we'll have multiple different rounds, and in between those, obviously, we'll be iterating the designs and making sure that we're still meeting users' needs as well. Anything else to add, Pete?
No, I think that covers the key points. I mean, certainly like iteration, I think is a big thing for me, because sometimes clients don't have budgets to allow for that. So you get one shot at improving the design, which is fine because you can still get a lot of value out of that. But I think where the true, one of the true powerful aspects of the design process is that ability to iterate and come back and refine until you're kind of happy that it's good enough. So that if we had a wish list, then certainly clients that were able to do that would be great. I think also for me personally, I'm a big fan of lean UX as well, and trying to get over that barrier that UX has to cost a lot of money, because I think partly the reason I think that UX sometimes gets bumped towards the end of the design process and sometimes can seem more like a tick boxing exercise is because people don't want to invest the money up front. But I think if you can suggest to them, well, if we took a lean approach to doing this, then it's actually a real minimal overhead, so we can get some really quick sort of insights for you. So I think finding clients that are set up to work in a lean way, because not all of them are, and brave enough to have a crack at it. For me personally, that's a really exciting sort of environment to work in.
So for anyone listening who doesn't quite understand what lean UX is, how would you describe a lean UX process?
So in a nutshell, the way I think about it is doing the least amount of effort to find out what you need to find out. So you don't have to go and do all of the research up front and absolutely nail the problem. What you start from is a set of assumptions and hypotheses about what you think you want to go and learn. So treat it as an experiment, like a scientific experiment. And you work out what your assumptions are, work out what you need to do to test those assumptions. And it might be just going and interviewing some people on the street. It might be doing some quick hand sketches and just getting first impressions from people about what they think you've done. And you do the minimum you need to do to test your hypothesis. And then once you've either proved your hypothesis correct and you can progress the design, or you've realized that you've totally got the wrong end of the stick and you need to pivot to a different sort of design direction. It allows you to do things very quickly, a lot more efficiently, a lot cheaper. So you can learn a lot faster about whether you're going in the right direction or not.
So I wanted to go back to the start with both of you, so Pete and Cathy. How did you both get started as UX consultants?
Do you want to go, Cathy?
Okay. So I'm an ex-Loughborough graduate. So I graduated from the Industrial Design and Technology degree. And in that degree, as I'm sure many of you listening know, we do a lot of research, a lot of work with users. My dissertation was all about talking to different users and things. And my major project, obviously, when we're producing that product, we always involve users. So for me, I enjoyed the people and talking to people more than I did designing. My sketch skills are not great. And I also did a placement year as well in industry. Went and worked with Vodafone and in the R&D department and did research with users. So I think elements of the course directed me towards this is something that I enjoyed, and then my placement kind of secured that for me. And then I actually got my job here at Bunnyfoot through Val Mitchell, who directed me towards Bunnyfoot. So I've got Val to thanks for my job here today, 10 years on.
So for those of you who don't know, Val Mitchell is the course leader for Loughborough's UX Masters course. So I work very closely with her.
And also a part-time careers advisor, it would seem. So a woman of many talents. Yes. So for me, I went back to university because I was looking for a sort of changing career and knew I wanted to do something that was going to involve helping people, because I've always enjoyed doing that. And just through the process of elimination of what careers would suit me, I discovered this thing called ergonomics. So it also meant that every job I was looking for required a degree in it. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to bite the bullet and come back to university. So I also, like Cathy, studied at Loughborough. So I came back and did a master's in ergonomics and human factors and fell in love with the subject so much I decided to stick around and do a PhD in it. But I always had the view that I wanted to go out and work in industry because I felt that's the way I could possibly have the most sort of agency for myself in terms of delivering stuff for people. So after I did my PhD, I went and worked at a product design agency in Warwick, and then spent about a year and a half there doing sort of physical product design and sort of human factors research for those. But then wanted to transition to do sort of more digital stuff. And then coming through, I went to a talk that Bunnyfoot were running, and just ended up chatting to the person. Well, I ended up chatting to you, I think, Cathy, and also the person that's now my line manager, and then the rest is history.
So it's been quite a sort of similar way in some ways. And obviously you start off industry, you think you know everything, and then you hit your first project and go, oh, crud, I don't actually know how to solve this. For both of you, what has been the hardest lesson to learn as a UX professional?
That's a very good question. I think for me personally, client and stakeholder management is one of the biggest skills that you have to develop as a consultant, because you can go to university and learn a lot of the theory and practice around the skills that you're trying to apply and your discipline. But if you don't know how to talk to other people about how to do that and sort of work with them collaboratively, which is, as a consultant, you always have to do, then that's quite a big learning curve I found to get up. So, and you only learn that through experience, I think, because even if you read books and certainly speaking to colleagues helps, but I think sometimes you just have to go through that yourself, because you're going to end up speaking to all sorts of different types of people. They all come with different personalities and agendas. And I think just through interacting with those people, that's how you gain the skill. But I think you have to be a good communicator to start with and be a good listener. That has to kind of come as sort of default. But then it's applying those kind of core skills to the art of client management. And for me personally, that's something that took, probably a few years for me to say I felt comfortable being good at that.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree. And I think at Bunnyfoot, when I first started out, obviously I was very junior and I shadowed a lot of my colleagues. So I went with them on meetings and saw how workshops went and how they dealt with different personalities. So at Bunnyfoot, we've got quite a good training, I guess, set up to kind of help at least observe those skills. And so you can start to try and practice them and get involved at very early stages. So, yeah.
So if anyone's listening to this thinking that this is a skill they need to work on, is there any advice that you give them for how they can go out and just improve that interpersonal connection?
I guess they can practice when they're working on projects in university, when they're working in teams at university, and just trying to tackle, maybe there's a disagreement in the group, or maybe there's a very loud personality, and how they might tackle that, or how they might try and kind of resolve the situation and things like that. So they could actually almost treat their fellow students as a client and trying to kind of get to the end goal and but not kind of take the lead too much. But it's kind of a fine line as they need to tread to make sure everyone's happy and still get to the end goal and get to the resolution that you need. So it's something that I think you can practice as a
and I think, as Cathy mentioned earlier, like observing other people's interactions as well. So it might not necessarily have to be within your team, but anyone that you look to as thinking, oh yeah, they're really slick at communicating with people, just observe them and see what they do. I think for me, like one of the golden rules was making sure I properly listened to what the client was saying. So practice your active listening skills. Don't be thinking about what you want to say next whilst the person's still talking to you. And you can practice that with friends and family as well. But also, as part of that listening process is also then sort of giving yourself time to reflect on that before you respond. And so sometimes I find that it's, in the early days, I'd be quite quick to sort of promise stuff or reply to people, whereas it actually probably needed a more considered approach. So not being scared to say, well, that's a really good point. I need to go away and think about that, or I need to check with someone about that. I'll get back to you later. Most people are perfectly fine with that because there's, but I think you have to be brave enough to kind of sort of push back on that sort of stuff.
I think as a consultancy, I'm sure John Dodd, our CEO, would agree that we should always say yes to everything, because of course we can do everything. It's just a matter of how, when and how much. So I think I work best with clients rather than saying no, just saying, okay, we'll take that on board and we'll come back to you. And sometimes we come back to them and say, okay, well, that requires an additional days of testing. It'll cost you this much, and kind of communicating to them what the implications are. And then they have the choice. So once they're more informed, then we can make a decision together.
That's a really good point and really good insight. So when someone comes to you and they're asking you, well, how would you make this better? You can obviously pull on your experience, pull on heuristics, and you know that there's some things that you can't guess and the user's going to be redirecting that. How would you broker that part if they're pushing for an answer now?
I think I'd just push on the fact that, we are getting users involved at this stage, and potentially, if it's something like you mentioned, it's something quite niche. So it's not something that's kind of day to day. It's not standard website. Maybe it's quite a specific thing for a specific target users that, myself and others might struggle with, then having those niche users is where we're going to get that valuable insight. So we can only get so much based on heuristics and our experiences of day-to-day websites, and it's the kind of the tip of the iceberg of those niche users and the feedback from them that's going to give us that additional benefit from testing with them.
Yeah, and I think there's also some value to sort of taking a mixed methods approach to this as well, because what you could say, if clients were literally like, we need to make a decision today about what to do, you could sort of go down the route and say, okay, well, why don't we do some small scale A/B testing, for example? So let's take a small amount of traffic that comes to your website and we'll just push this design to them. So with our experience and the use of heuristics and our, the best effort that we think we can produce without getting users involved in usability testing, let's have a crack at this as a starting point, do some small scale testing with it, and then see if it nudges the needle in the right direction. And then we buy ourselves some time if we think we're going in the right direction to then sort of do some more detailed investigation with users.
So before we started recording, we're talking about the way that COVID has changed what you do as consultancy, that you're already experts in remote use testing, and that's gone from a sort of sideline to a main way of working, which is fantastic. What do you do when your main users are maybe in a different country or hard to get hold of?
Well, we're quite fortunate in terms of people that are based in different countries, because we do a lot of that already with a lot of our clients, and we've already got well-established networks of other recruitment agencies that we can contact. So Bunnyfoot's fortunate enough to have an excellent in-house recruitment team called Bunnyfield, and they liaise for us as consultants with these other agencies. And we've built up good working relationships with them. So, for example, myself and Cathy work with a client who have core markets in Asia. And we routinely work with the agencies in Hong Kong, etc., to sort of help facilitate that process. So, I think it's just I think a big part of that is just growing your network of other agencies that you can partner with to facilitate that. What I would say actually is that remote testing in some way actually makes it a lot easier to get hold of people, because you're not having to rely on, say, being able to come to your lab. So it's not necessarily like geographically so limiting. It also means that you can do things a bit more flexibly in terms of timescales. So if people are working from home and you're wanting to talk to them, it might be easier for them to slot an hour user testing session into their working at home day than it would be to travel to your labs, to spend an hour there and travel home again. So I think in some ways we actually are benefiting from that.
Yeah, and I think that, working remotely in different countries doesn't really provide any barriers. It's just additional logistics to organise in terms of translators and moderators. So there's a little bit more time required for us to firstly get the brief from the client. Then we would normally create the discussion guide. We would then brief the moderator in Hong Kong, let's say, and then we'd also have a live translator. So the testing is all done live. And we will normally, if time differences allow, we will actually log in and watch the live translations of the sessions, and we will make notes for the moderator. And we can also have direct communication with that moderator as well. So we use kind of WhatsApp or other channels to communicate. So if we have any additional questions, we can do that live. And sometimes it doesn't allow. So we do stuff in Australia, and obviously the time difference there is so great. But what we will do is we'll watch the recordings of the sessions as quickly as we can. And then if we do have any feedback, let's say there's 2 days of testing, then we'll give them that feedback after day 1 before they go into day 2. So testing in different countries isn't a barrier. It's really interesting, and I find it amazing, the cultural differences and like just hearing different people's views and things. It's like I actually really enjoy it. I've done a lot of it over lockdown 1 and 2. So it's not a bad thing. I quite enjoy it myself.
Yeah, I think what's also really helpful from a client perspective is that because we're able to handle all the sort of logistical side for them, they only effectively have to deal with Bunnyfoot. So we provide a sort of like a one-stop shop for them, and we can handle all that process for them. So I think in other situations it might be that they have to have local teams interacting with local agencies to do maybe lab-based stuff. I mean, part of Bunnyfoot services that we take care of all that for them as well. So whether we were doing this remotely or not, I think that's just something that clients benefit from. But for clients who want to get into other markets or who are in other markets and want to get research done, then we're kind of, well set up to help them with that.
And I think also just your point about, participants that are hard to reach in terms of accessibility and things like that. So, if you've got participants that are mobility impaired or whatever that might be, then actually doing remote testing in the comfort of their own home, using their own devices, not asking them to go across London to come into a lab and for a strange environment. So actually it makes things easier for those participants to join. And again, I think we've seen a lot of participants available. So our kind of recruitment lists and our pool of participants that we could get to attend has obviously massively increased. So we've got lots of eager participants waiting for us. So we've not had any problems with recruitment at all recently. So
that's excellent. So on the thing about accessibility then, now, does accessibility form a large part of what you do in your testing, or is that more of a side issue to what people feel about websites?
Well, we're very reactive to our clients. So it depends on the clients and how mature they are in UX and how much they need or have to or want to consider accessibility. So we're quite directed, obviously, by the clients and their needs. We would, of course, love to see more of it in the industry, but it is something that more... We find clients do it when they need to, when regulations come in, and not necessarily doing it kind of as standard, which is a shame. But it's just how things are. I mean, we're fighting for UX to be involved in the UCD process at all. Never mind, accessibility. So it's a struggle. It's a bit of a fight, but it's one we're continuing to kind of promote and trying to get more and more on board.
Yeah, and I think it's a worthwhile cause to pursue as well, because much like getting a UX involved early in the process is actually a benefit. Designing with accessibility in mind from the start, if you include it from the start, it's not going to really cost you anything extra to do. It's just good design, good inclusive design. I think that the problems typically come, I think, as Cathy was saying, is when they feel like they have to do it, and then it's just all of a sudden, it's this big headache. We're going to have to spend loads of time and money doing it. But if you do it right, or even if you have to sort of take that step back and say, right, let's go and do a proper accessibility audit and look where we need to improve things. Once you've kind of given yourself a good platform to start from, then in theory it shouldn't actually, involve too much extra effort from that point, and then loads of extra people get to benefit from it. So I think, I suppose if I had a wish regarding accessibility, is that people saw it as, something that wasn't a burden. It was something that actually is going to benefit them and their customers. And if they do it early on, it's actually going to save the money in the long run.
I mean, good accessibility is just good usability. So it will benefit those who require it, but also every user anyway. So, yeah.
So if you're starting at the very beginning of a project and you're going to bake accessibility and good accessibility into the design, what guides you in knowing what is good accessibility?
Well, we have the WCAG standards, so we would always look to those and do a kind of audit on them. So we have them kind of very much like the heuristics. We would fall back onto them and make sure that we're abiding to all of those. What
I would say also is that we're quite fortunate at Bunnyfoot that we have a lot of accessibility expertise in the business. So, our John Dodd, our CEO, actually helped inform the WCAG standards. And we teach a practical accessibility course, which has really good practical advice about, if you could just do, say, like the top 10 things to improve the accessibility of your website, here they are. So even that as a great set of heuristics to start from, without any extra sort of, real overhead for our clients. And we would try to bake those in. I think what we'd also try and do, if we can, is to include people with accessibility needs in our user testing as well. So just to have that broader representation of the customer base. I think on a slight tangent, I was going to say one of the real powerful things about doing user testing is when you can get clients to come and observe the testing or view the sessions remotely, because then they get to see the real frustrations of their customers and the real moments of joy for their customers. And so I think if they see people struggling with their products because of accessibility issues, then they can't skirt around the fact that they've just caused someone to have a bad experience. And I think that provides a real good motivator for them to do something about it.
And I think for me, those sessions are a lot more powerful with users with access needs, because they are completely, they literally can't get to that button. It's actually impossible for them to complete that task. It's not just a case of, oh, that's annoying or that's frustrating or it took me a while to find that. It's actually you're stopping them from actually using your service. So we tend to find quite a lot of what we call the showstoppers in those sessions because of the way things have been coded or things like that. So
it reminds me of that famous cartoon of someone doing user testing and then the developers just watching through going, no, you're not doing it right, you're doing it wrong, do it this way.
Yeah, we have quite good soundproofing in our lab, so make sure our clients are all on mute and the videos are off when they join as well. So
okay, so you've spoken a few times about wanting to get UX design in at the beginning or even in at all for people to recognize the value that it brings. So what do you think businesses misunderstand the most about UX design?
I would say they think it's UI design, because I think people just assume they need an app or their website needs updating, and if they just reskin it and make it look nice, that's going to fix the problems with a bit of tinkering maybe here and there based on maybe some analytics, which again is part of the process. But I think if you properly understand user experiences, the result of the interactions at every touch point a customer is going to have with your organization and its products and services, it's not just necessarily about the digital experience or the digital touch points, it's everything. And I'm sure if they took a step back and thought about all the good experiences and the bad experiences they've had as customers, they would probably realize, oh, well, it's not just when I'm on the website, it's when I ring up customer services or when the delivery's late and I want to find out where my stuff's got to or whatever. So I think it's, I think if people could see that it's more about the holistic experience, but also crucially, it's about how do we understand what customers need and solve their problems at the same time as addressing what the business needs. It's not about championing the user at the expense of everything else. It's about how does everyone get to win from this? Because anything that we design that's going to improve the user experience also has to be viable for the organization. So I think, again, it's more of an education piece, I think, in terms of seeing this as the business is going to get to benefit from this as well as the customers. It's not, one wins and the other loses.
I think the other problem as well is clients can be quite deliverable focused. So they're focusing on the app, the website, and so they're not thinking about the entire process that we've gone through. So it's usually kind of the first thing to go because they're thinking about those handhold, tangible deliverables that they're going to get. I'm going to get that website, I'm going to get that app. Well, where can we cut corners? Where can we cut these costs? Okay, well, that's given us insight, but that's not a tangible thing. That's not going to, I can't obviously see the output of that really. It's usually integrated, the insights that we gather from testing and research, it's integrated within those designs. So there'll be elements of it throughout, but it's not the deliverable of the website. And I think there's also been a danger in the industry of UI agencies or digital agencies saying, oh yeah, we can do your UX for you, and just doing a bit of an expert evaluation or things like that, which and so they feel like they have ticked that box. They feel like they have considered users because it's got the word UX in it. So I think there's a danger in the industry that's happened as well.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of follow on from that is that if UX sort of professionals are called in too late to the process, they obviously come with a cost to the project. And as to Cathy's point, if we're called in to do sort of some last minute usability testing, like the week before the product goes live, and whatever we recommend for the design is not going to be implemented in time for the release, or it's going to be pushed back to phase 2 and possibly never happen, then the value that we seem to be bringing to the project isn't is minimised because we've not been brought in at the point where we can have the most impact.
And actually, our input might be that we now might need to go back and actually have additional cost to the project, because what we've highlighted in that research is actually going to cost them a considerable amount of money now that we're this far down the line on the project. So, bringing us in at the very end and not at all before can actually sound and feel like a very expensive thing to do, because we're now saying, okay, this needs to be changed, and they're saying, okay, but that means we need to have all of these things changed, which is very expensive and just never going to happen. So the insight and the feedback and the recommendations we can provide that are actually feasible are very limited at that stage.
Okay, so let's think about when you're running these evaluations. I'm guessing that every project's different, depending on what the client needs, what their goals are. But in a typical project, what are the kinds of evaluations that you would run?
Do you want to go, Cathy?
On you, Pete?
Okay. Well, you're right, Chris. It's very much dependent on what the customer or the client wants us to test. So my kind of approach is always to try and sort of use the right tool for the job. So if it's a case of there are certain journeys that have been built into a digital product that need sort of some qualitative insight, then usability testing is definitely the way to go. If it's a case of we don't really have an idea of what the problem is yet, then we would suggest maybe some more exploratory research up front in some sort of way. So, for example, Cathy mentioned earlier, like diary studies, or when COVID allows, more in the field, contextual research, that kind of stuff. So I think in terms of the approaches that we take, I think it's very much defined by the initial conversations, kickoff like meetings you have with your client to properly understand what they're trying to achieve. They might already have an idea of what they would like you to do, but I think it's important as us as consultants is to have that proper conversation with the client to understand what problem they want to solve, and then we can say, your suggested approaches is what we think too. Let's crack on. Or actually, it would be better if we tried it this way instead.
Yeah. So at Bunnyfoot, we have project managers and proposal team who actually respond to projects and requests from clients, but they'll also talk with consultants, and we might get involved at those initial calls just to help to advise both the project managers and the proposal team in the best approach. So the client might say to us, okay, I've got 20k, what's the best way to use that money? And we might suggest multiple quite lean UX rounds, or again, depending on the objectives and what they're wanting to find out from the research. But we tend to kind of get involved and provide, as a consultancy, advice on how best to use that budget and how best to use the time and where we are in the project as well.
So you mentioned before WCAG or WCAG. That's one kind of expert heuristic you can use. What are your opinions of various scales like SUS?
Do you want to go, Cathy?
I can do, yeah. So we have SUS and NPS, so System Usability Score and the Net Promoter Score. We do use them, and we kind of go through phases of using them and not using them. It's a bit of a depending on timings and all sorts of different things. I've experienced problems with using those measures, and this is when we're doing multiple rounds with a client, because we're doing iterative rounds and we're testing slightly different journeys, or we're testing slightly different fidelity. And so I've had a client come to me and say, oh, our SUS or NPS has gone down, what's happening? And I say, well, it's not gone down because we're not testing the same thing. And so it's important when we're using these measures that we are using them correctly, and that we are communicating them well with the team in terms of what they can compare and what they can't compare. I don't know about your experiences, but I get, after talking to Vodafone, I'll get a text saying, what's your score on NPS and things like that. And I often think, well, how are you going to use this? What is this based on? What is the point of asking this question? And it's just arbitrary, or is it actually going to be used? So I think for me, it's about, yes, we can use them, but it's about how we're going to use them and the danger of the team misunderstanding them or mistaking them for certain things. So They can be useful if we're testing, like for benchmarking, definitely, like when we do projects from year on year and we're testing the same journeys and things like that. So they're really useful then as a benchmarking exercise. But when we're doing these really quick iterative rounds and we're changing fidelity, we're changing journeys, then it can be quite dangerous to do that. But
yeah, I think I'd also sort of put on that is, if you're working with kind of more quantitative metrics, I'm not sure I find they're very well allied with small sample sizes for usability testing. The small sample usability testing is excellent for qualitative insight. If you're going down the NPS route or the SUS route, that's probably better handled by a survey or something like that, or a larger piece of work that you would do over a period of time. For all the reasons that Cathy mentioned, that if different journeys you're testing, different people, whatever, brings a whole load of variability into what the measure is going to tell you. And I think a big part of our job as consultants is to make sure clients understand the pros and cons of using metrics, because some people can get fixated on chasing metrics like conversion rates and all that kind of stuff. And metrics are great as long as Cathy said, what they're good for and what they're not good for, and how to use them appropriately.
Yeah, and again, metrics generally in qualitative research. So we tend to try and avoid using metrics as much as we can, because, and so we, rather than saying 2 or 3 users, we might say a few users or most users or many users, because of the dangers around that report or that deliverable being taken away and extrapolated. So 97% of users said this, and it's like, well, that's only 4 out of 5 or whatever it is. So, and I've seen it in large scale companies where they've compared, a massive quant study with our 6 users, and you can't do that. So, we will provide numbers if we need to, but we tend to kind of stick to the more, it is qualitative, and so we try and avoid that kind of confusion and comparison, because it's just not a fair comparison to make.
So in your design work, when you are doing that redesign of the website to increase just the sense of satisfaction that someone gets when using it, if quantitative measures aren't driving forward the decision, if it's not a science, what role does inspiration fall in the design process?
Well, I think it informs, it's a massive part of the design process. I mean, designing is problem solving in a creative way. And so, you could do, you have to be creative even in terms of how you do your research. But once you have your insights, it's now down to us as experts and the people who work with the experts to take those insights and craft them into something that people are going to be using. So I think, in terms of, there's never like a one size fits all solution. Yes, you can use heuristics. Yes, you can use design patterns. But in terms of you implementing it in a way that's going to work for your business and your customers, there's a whole load of creativity that comes into making that fit. And that's why we do things like running like ideation workshops. So, you start with that divergent thinking, the classic double diamond approach, and you just chuck as much creativity at it as you can. Until you, and then you can start refining what you're after. But I think it's worth making the point that UX is about bringing rigor to good UX is about bringing rigor to the process. So you're making sort of evidence-driven decisions, but it's equally about understanding how to design properly. And a big part of that is using your creativity to solve challenges.
Yeah, we often provide recommendations to the problem or the issue that we've observed during the session. So we'll provide this is a solution or a potential way in which we can resolve this. But then we will often work with the design teams to come up with, okay, they say it can't be done because of these constraints within the business or whatever, or it's too expensive to do it that way. So we'll kind of work with our insight that we've got from the users plus their insight in terms of the business and how it's set up and the restrictions and things are there to come together to some kind of compromise around still meeting the user's need, but also meeting the business objectives and the business constraints that we have to work to. Obviously, as a consultancy, it's difficult for us to know every in and out of every business. It's often quite a steep learning curve in terms of how each business works, how their budgeting works, and the constraints that they have. But we work alongside those design teams to collaboratively come up with a design that works for everyone if we can.
Yeah, and I think just one final thing I would say is that, to touch upon what I was saying earlier, is that creativity doesn't just mean being able to draw stuff. So if people don't feel like they are great designers in the classical sense of like visual design, that is to me just one manifestation of creativity. You can be creative in all sorts of ways. So you're creative in your research approach, creative in terms of concepts. You can come up with ideas that someone else can then sort of like turn into sort of visual things. Even if you could just learn some very basic sketching skills, you'd be surprised about what you could actually do. So I think for anyone working in UX or anyone that's looking to move into the field, your students, for example, is that they shouldn't feel they shouldn't have any doubt that just because they might not be able to draw a masterpiece, that they won't be able to use creativity in different ways to solve these problems. And it's anyone that's got an interest in solving problems for people and for the clients they're working with are going to be doing a good job.
I remember holding a workshop a few years back now, and I just asked everyone to just draw a picture, and it could be anything you like, anything at all. And there's one girl at the front, and she was physically shaking. And it found out that what happened is when she was a teenager or a young kid, someone had told her she couldn't draw. And she just embodied this throughout her life. She'd gone through like, I'm not someone that can draw. So what I did is I got a picture on the wall, and I can draw okay. I'm not a great artist, but I can hold my own. And showed one of my illustrations of just a figure drawing. And then next to it, I just drew a stick man. I went, right, they're both people. You both know they're both people. They've both got long hair. You know they're both women. The one on the right, the stick person, that's just fine. And when you actually get them to realise that it's okay, you can use software, you can use storyboarding, you can use images from Unsplash and walk through, it kind of can open things up quite a lot.
Yeah, we have a workshop that we run, and the start of that workshop is just drawing. So you have I think 20 boxes, and you have to draw every few seconds. The person will say a book, umbrella, or whatever, and you have to really quickly just draw these basic objects, and that just gets everyone warmed up in terms of just drawing like stickmen and things like that. So no one becomes precious of their drawings because you don't have time to think. You've just got to just draw stickmen and umbrellas and whatever and stuff. So activities like that can really help to kind of get rid of that barrier, because people have it. It's definitely a thing that even everyone in industry still has it. So not just students, not just everyone. So yeah, that works quite well.
So for someone who's trying to enter the UX industry, maybe from university like both of you did, what do you think are the key skills that they need to be successful?
For me personally, I think listening to other people and listening to yourself is a really important thing. So in terms of the listening to yourself, find out the things that you enjoy, find out the things you're curious about, and sort of try and pursue those. Because if you can do the stuff that you enjoy doing, then your job's going to be much more worthwhile and rewarding and fun. Fun's a big part. Life's too short to not have fun, I think. But also listening to other people, listen to your colleagues, learn from their experiences, listen to your clients, understand what they need, listen to the users. And the more you listen, the more you absorb, you will just naturally become better at doing your job. And because you'll be like a sponge soaking up all that stuff. So I think, I suppose another way of looking at it is that, don't think you've ever sort of learned enough. I mean, if you kind of referenced it earlier, Chris, but this whole idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect, Google it for all the listeners, Google it if you haven't heard of it. But if you go and look at it, you'll realise that you will go through a point of sort of after you've gone through I know everything, and then realising you don't know everything, then you'll start to kind of go back up the slope to the comfortable place. But it's a never-ending sort of process of learning. And if you think something's come within your comfort zone, go and you're someone like me who annoyingly always wants to learn new stuff, then go and find something new to learn, because there's so much to UX that you can get stuck into.
I can definitely recommend starting a podcast and talking to people. That's a great way for that. Just realizing when you have a conversation, going, oh yeah, I know this stuff. Then you go, I'll go and learn that thing after this session.
They say a good way to learn something is teach something. So actually teaching others as well is a great thing to do. So if you can do that, then it kind of forces you to commit and to actually know your stuff. And it, like, the training courses that we have at Bunnyfoot, I teach the usability testing training course, and I'm still learning things, and people come to me with questions each time, and I'll consider things or go back to the drawing board on things. So teaching's definitely a great way to learn.
So it's been fantastic talking to you both today. And I always like to finish on the same question every time, which is, what do you think would make the world a better place?
Wow, that's
Cure for COVID.
We're getting there.
Yeah, not far off.
Another podcast about that topic.
Empathy. I would say empathy. If everyone can get some empathy, then that quite a lot of what we do is about sharing and communicating empathy. And if we can all be better at kind of understanding it and having more empathy for others, then I think that will come through.
Yeah, and I think that what goes along with that is the sense of working together on whatever it is you're doing, whether it's personal relationships, work relationships, project work, being open to collaboration and not just being in it for yourself. Personally, I find so much reward from working with other people and building those relationships and having a successful outcome for the team. I think if people could take that approach in general to life in whatever field they work with, I think collectively we'd be a lot better off.
So thank you so much for your time. If any of our listeners want to reach out to you and get in touch with either yourselves or Bunnyfoot, what's the best way they can contact you?
Well, they can contact us directly. So I'm Pete at bunnyfoot.com.
And I'm Cathy at bunnyfoot.com. We have all the usual socials and stuff like that. So reach out.
Or
just come along to bunnyfoot.com. Go old school.
I'll make sure I'll put a link to Bunnyfoot in the show notes so anyone can just click straight through. And I'm sure that if they get in contact with you, they'll have a fantastic experience. So Pete Underwood and Cathy Carr, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.